Good afternoon. My name is Maxine McGregor, and I'm an associate instructor in the School of Social Work at the University of Central Florida. Today, I will be presenting on the importance of mentoring, boundaries, and safety with child welfare professionals. In child welfare, professionals face challenging situations due to the nature of the job and working with diverse children and families. It is important to have a support system and use best practices for effective outcomes. Today, we're going to discuss the importance of mentoring to support and prepare child welfare professionals. We're going to learn how to set some healthy boundaries within the field and learn how to create a safe environment. So I'm going to start off by telling you a little bit about me. My undergraduate degree is in business administration with a major in real estate. I worked in this field for about 5 years, and after 2 layoffs due to the market, I decided to try something different. And I fell into child welfare. When I started in this field in 2001, I was shocked to find out how many families did not have the resources or the knowledge on how to obtain these resources needed in their community and within their homes. I was also alarmed at the rate of turnover in the field in staff. I started off as an investigator and shadowed various protective investigators. Some were good, some not so good. Of course, when I started, there were backlog cases, and I received about 30 cases on my first day in the field. I developed my style of working with clients and decided I wanted them to trust me and understand that I was there to help. I guess for me, social work was in me. Growing up with parents that were always helping neighbors and strangers and family was all I knew. So helping my clients, I would say, was a calling and a great fit for me. I remember growing up that my dad worked for American Express, and so they transferred to Florida, and he wanted to get out of the cold. And so there was a lot of families that also moved to Florida with the agency, and there were a lot of single moms with just their children. And so my mom would always have my dad go over and help them put up curtains, wash the cars, cut the grass. And so that was what my dad and I did throughout, the neighbors and his coworkers. We would go over to their homes and just kind of help them out. I didn't have a social work degree yet when I started in the field. So I didn't know the name of the techniques I was using. For example, the importance of the engagement step. That's the first stage in the generalist intervention model. I got involved in different things within the community. I became a member of the Orange County Domestic Violence Task Force and the Orange County Fatality Review Board. My supervisor decided, due to my advanced training in domestic violence and involvement in the community task force, she'd give me the domestic violence cases to work. I also became interested in human trafficking because I noticed runaways would go missing and no one knew where they were going. They weren't going home. They were just missing in action. So, I graduated from the Child Welfare Academy in about 2009. And one of the tools our group developed was cards that CPIs in our service center carried to identify possible human trafficked children on their caseload. So there was questions on these cards that PIs could ask, like, how could these kids afford all this jewelry? And what were these tattoos meaning that they got? And if they had older boyfriends. And during this time is when the department added human trafficking as a maltreatment. So it kind of helped with the cards that we developed for our PIs going out into the field. During my time within this field, I was also a case manager, working with families for a longer period of time, which allowed for more interaction and assistance with completing case plan tasks. And as a resource specialist, which I became afterwards when I went over to the case management organization, there were 6 of us, and we worked in the community to find needed resources for our families and also ensure that children were getting their comprehensive behavioral health assessments completed timely so they could receive the recommended services needed. And then my last position was as a client relations coordinator working with Tallahassee and the governor's office liaison to rectify situations with cases and other department issues. I received an opportunity to work with the University of Central Florida in 2016, teaching students the Title IV-E program. And I fell in love with teaching students about child welfare. And after 7 years, I'm still here. So that's been a great fit as well. If you notice on this slide, there's a lot of skills needed to do this work. I can say when I obtained my master's, things clicked for me, and I learned better ways to work with my clients. This complex job requires critical thinking, on-the-spot problem-solving skills, and not everyone has this ability. I remember when I first started with the department, they were conducting the Myers-Briggs personality test for candidates to see if you were right for the job. That's no longer a requirement. Looking back at that time and now, I think it was a great idea to conduct that test to measure how you take in information. What's real or a possibility? Are you an introvert or an extrovert? Because in this field, you really need to be an extrovert. And how do you come to conclusions? Are you a thinker or a feeler? How do you approach others, judging or perceiving? These are important questions to ask yourself when working in this field. I remember a worker going out on a home visit. I was still fairly new in the job, so I didn't really know a lot about my expectations. And so this worker went out to this home, and because the mother didn't open the front door when the worker knocked, and the worker could see the mother peeking through the window blinds, the worker decided to kick the door in. Was this worker thinking or feeling? Worker definitely wasn't thinking. There were a lot of emotions there. And in this job, we can't take things personally. We're going to have clients that are going to say things to us that may not be kind, but we can't take it personally. Needless to say, the client called the office and informed the supervisor of what happened, and the worker was fired. For the fiscal year 2019-2020, we want to look at some turnover rate of the department CPI positions. And I say case child protective investigation more so because that's where I have surveys and information. I don't have anything regarding case management, but a lot of this applies to case management as well when it comes to mentoring and safety and boundaries. So for the fiscal year 2019-2020, the CPI retention rate was approximately 55.77%. Turnover rates in fiscal year 2019-2020 was about 34.8%, and in 2020-21, 36.3%. Data from the survey in 2021 shows when there's turnover, there's a high impact for stress and emotional exhaustion and safety concerns, because the remaining CPIs, they have to take on that workload that's left behind. It becomes a cycle that keeps continuing. So how can we all alleviate the cycle? What can we do? I mean, I believe that there are things that can be tweaked and implemented to try and retain staff. And so I want to talk about a little bit about those kinds of things today with you all. So why a mentor? What is the purpose of mentoring? You know, as we know, it's for developing competence and knowledge to a mentee, to help guide and teach them their job, to provide them with resources and a support system, and someone to share experiences and best practices with. This can be done either individually or in a group. So when I think about my time in child welfare, I reflect on the supervisors that made a difference and impacted me in the field. What did they do that stood out more than other supervisors? I'm not going to answer that until the end of this presentation. So think about, for you also, throughout your time in child welfare, who stood out to you as your supervisors and what made you stay or that impacted you. So if we take the time to mentor our staff, we're investing in them. There's a professional commitment and a parallel process between each party involved. It's mutually beneficial because it also helps the mentor stay up to date on policies and best practice. The mentor has skills and knowledge that can be distributed to the mentee. And at the same time, it helps the mentor keep up to date on things in the organization. Reflective supervision relates to professional and personal development of the worker, where the supervisor allows the worker to find results on their own, right, and use those critical thinking skills and process them while the supervisor practices attentive listening and they're completely present in this moment, right? That means protected time, no distractions, no phone calls, no one walking in and out of their office, and really valuing the mentee's opinions and their initiatives. So mentoring gives a chance for a teachable moment as well. So for example, when I was a case manager, we had monthly meetings in our unit. Our supervisor decided that she was going to have one person in the unit provide an information session on a topic they felt comfortable teaching. So for instance, it could be on domestic violence, it could be safety planning, documentation, preparing judicial reviews, whatever you felt strong about. This allowed for peer-to-peer mentoring within the unit. And it helped to develop respect and cohesion within the members of the unit. And with reflective supervision, there's consistent and predictable meeting times and expectations for each meeting. So we knew every time we met, someone was going to present in some part of the meeting something that they felt strong about and they felt confident enough to teach. It does encourage teaching, personal reflection, and the development of a trusting relationship. It should be a place where the mentee feels secure and safe to make mistakes and ask questions and have their opinions, thoughts, and initiatives valued. So a lot of times I hear sometimes from workers where they would say that they didn't feel comfortable talking to their supervisor. So they really didn't talk to their supervisor. They just figured out stuff on their own. And with reflective supervision, this is about that two-way parallel process of respect between the supervisor and the mentee, and being able to bring your thoughts into that process where you can take constructive criticism if needed and kind of learn parts of your job at the same time. So because working in child welfare, investigations or case management is a complex job and you're working with diverse populations, there's job expectations that have to be met, whether it is policy and regulation expectations, court expectations, home visit expectations, and it just goes on for the expectations, right? So working in child welfare takes organization skills, it takes time management skills, social skills as well. And having a mentor help you learn your job and to learn the reason why things may be done a specific way is important. So for example, why is it important to have the parents in court within 24 hours after removal? And why it's important to develop a reunification case plan within a certain time frame and give that parent so many months to reunify with that child. Mentors are there to provide guidance and constructive criticism to help you grow into an effective professional. And that's the mentor's role. I was fortunate, as I said before, when I started to have a caring supervisor that worked the trenches with her unit and just endured what we endured and ensured that self-care was a priority. I worked the night shift and it was 2 p.m. to 11 p.m. So we were on call about once a week from 11 p.m. to 8 a.m. If we were on call that night, she would allow that individual to go home at about 8 p.m. to get some rest. So if you had to be called out between 11 p.m. and 8 a.m., and sometimes you were called out and you were out all night, you wouldn't be tired from just getting off of work at 11 p.m. and then going straight into an on-call case that came in. I must say I had great supervisors while working in the field, both as a CPI and a case manager. They mentored me, they taught me how to do the work effectively, and it's something I've always appreciated. The Army principles of unit training. So I'm ex-military, and so I thought that we should be doing some of these within our units and within the agency to help prepare our staff and retain our staff. The following principles should be continuous and progressive throughout a child welfare professional's career. As a 10-year Army veteran, I looked at the structure of the organization and compared it to child welfare and saw ways that the Army principles could be woven into what we do and how we operate. So I noticed a few things, such as the military, there's standards that are learned from day one, and they're continuous throughout your whole career. It's instilled in you, and that's how you operate. As you see a lot of people who were in the military and they have retired, or that they still have a lot of those habits. Right. So it's something that's been instilled in them for a long time, and it's something that they continue in their life. It's standards that everyone follows throughout their career. So in child welfare, you may learn something in pre-service. And when you get to your service center, you hear, oh, we don't do it like that. And then you go to another service center and it's done another way. So the lack of consistency for the standards, it kind of varies from place to place and from unit to unit. So the first principle is train to standard. This means basically teaching the expectations, right, for child welfare practices and services consistently. Ensure child welfare practices are guided by values related to the code of ethics, which I think is very important. So, for example, social workers follow a code of ethics to conduct in their practice and the core values of the profession. This is consistent throughout your career as a social worker. So having a set of ethics that is followed and that standard in child welfare is really important. So there's no gray lines. Of course, there's scenarios that are going to be different, but there's a standard that everyone follows. Providing a foundation for preparation for staff and continued education on the impact of trauma, child development, family dynamics, parenting skills. Always training standards, and because society changes and things changes, having these trainings and continued education on different topics like child development and parenting skills and trauma is really important. So when staff is going out, they feel confident about the things that they're saying and they're educating their families on and the resources they're providing for them. Train as you will fight, or in our instance would be train as you would practice. So role play with your staff on common scenarios to prepare them in the field. This is a pedagogical practice that we use in education all the time. We're always doing role playing with our students so they can learn the different theories in the classroom. So when they go out into the field and in their internships, they can practice what they have been going over in class, right? They can put that theory into practice in the field. So using role playing is really important, and it also builds confidence for your staff. Prepare staff for court hearings and subpoenas. I know when I was in the field, the first time I had to go into court, I was very, very nervous because I, didn't know what to expect. And so sitting with an attorney to kind of go over some of the process and kind of asking you questions to help you answering the questions, telling you what you should say and what you should stay away from was very helpful. So just kind of role playing on preparing staff for court hearings and subpoenas that they may receive. And then standards-based training. It's something that the military uses a lot. It's a system of instruction and assessment to build that confidence. So in the military, for instance, you get instruction on how to use your weapon, right? How does it work? How to take it apart and reassemble it so you're ready to use it. You learn to master this standard by demonstrating and practicing the skill. It's the same thing in child welfare, providing instruction, for example, on the components of a child functioning assessment and how to complete it. It takes practice to ensure that the essential information that's needed in that assessment is in there. So it takes practice to learn those things. Train while operating, having open communication with your staff while they're in the field, where a worker knows that if they're in the field and they get stuck, they can call their supervisor on the phone to help them out. Supervisors need to identify areas of improvement and develop plans to increase proficiency through training of their staff. They see where improvement is needed when reading the cases for approval, because each case has to be reviewed by the supervisor. So just seeing where your worker may need more training on something that they may be struggling with. And then the supervisor going out periodically with staff on a case, just to kind of almost like shadowing them and seeing where you think that they may need more training on or things that they may struggle with. And you won't know that unless you're actually out there with them. Train fundamentals first. Of course, the pre-service training is completed through, lectures and demonstrations and practical work, and should include some basic skills. So, for example, maybe incorporating how to build rapport with clients, how to de-escalate a situation, etc. Things that you may not learn in pre-service, but you really see it when you actually go into the field and start working. I know when I started, I realized the best approach with clients was not to get right into the allegations. It was basically building that relationship with the client first. And so once they opened the door and I introduced myself and where I was from, of course, they would start yelling and screaming. But I would allow them to vent, backed up a little bit, allow them to vent. Eventually they apologized because they would see that you weren't yelling with them and engaging in that type of behavior. And so they would apologize and say, I know you're just doing your job. I'm just very frustrated. I would talk with them while I collected driver's license to verify the caregiver, Medicaid cards, Social Security information. And as I was documenting this information and building that rapport with that client, by the time we got into getting the allegations and talking about the allegations, we could have a conversation. And just because I took that time up front with them and treated them with dignity and worth, it became more of a conversation where they respected why you were out there and you respected, their situation. I've actually removed children and had the parents help me pack bags because of the initial approach that I used, and explained and educated them on the reason why the child must be removed. Sometimes they don't really understand what the statute 39 says and why we have to do the things that we do. So sometimes just spending an extra time educating them, even though they may not agree with it, but kind of helping them understand the job and the nature of the job. So, and then providing them information for the court hearing and the procedures and the next steps. I can say I was looking at some research, and in one study, 120 child welfare professionals learning about solution-based casework were assigned to one of three groups. One group was classroom training only. Another group was classroom training with reinforcement, with mentoring. And the third group was no training at all. So researchers reviewed the case records to examine the effects of the study and found that training with mentoring resulted in higher levels of transfer of learning compared with only training or with no training at all. So mentoring is a really key ingredient in making sure that our staff feels confident in what they're doing and building that support system for them. Train to develop adaptability. Here again, using standards-based training that's progressive. So as the worker continues on in their career, they are learning more things, they're progressing, and now they're able to teach someone else that may be coming in. I know that they have like senior positions now. So you start as an investigator or case manager, then you go on to a senior investigator or case manager. And so as you are training and continuing your education and getting your supervision, your mentoring, now you're able to do the same for someone else. So my job was communications when I was in active duty, and I took a course to train as a combat medic when preparing to go to the Gulf War. So one exercise we did while training was learn how to administer IVs, stop bleeding from gunshot wounds, use splints and other emergency treatments. This was to prepare us in case the medics got hurt, because you're only assigned so many medics in your unit, right? So it taught us how to be able to cross-train, right? And being prepared in all situations. So cross-training is another way to develop skills in your workers. So for example, a supervisor has an emergency and is out for a week. Production doesn't stop. Cases don't stop rolling in. But a cross-trained worker in the unit can step in and keep production going. I know that some workers or some supervisors, they kind of keep stuff to themselves and they don't let anyone else know because they don't want anyone running their units. So if you train someone to be able to step into your position, then things can keep flowing as it should. Train to understand the operational environment. This basically means, pretty much being able to function in different spaces. So for example, when the world became fully remote, people had to learn how to do their jobs online, by phone, or Zoom, and still get the job done to keep our families safe. It consists of conditions, circumstances, influences that affected the employment of child welfare. we had to quickly pivot and still be able to function. So just knowing what your operational environment is and how you can pivot to for any situation that may arise. Building cohesive teams through mutual trust, creating shared understanding, providing clear intent, exercising disciplined initiatives, and utilizing policy while accepting risk. This is actually the 6 principles the military uses for mission direction. So whenever there's a mission, these 6 principles are put in place. I want to know, do you see how we can interchange some of these skills in child welfare and implement these Army principles into what we do every day? So just kind of think a little bit about that. Due to the uncertainties of the job when going into the field, preparedness is essential. So consistent training and education, which I say all the time because I really believe in that, it's very necessary. Building resilience in your staff to strengthen them, the individual and the team, like by doing team building exercises. Team building exercises, it helps for cohesiveness and for people to rely on one another and know that they can trust that person that has their back. I know that when I was in the field, our unit was very close that if I had someone that he had a worker that when he would go there, the worker would always be inappropriate. I mean, the client would always be inappropriate. So he would always ask me to go out with him on this case just because to protect not only himself, but the client in case the client said something that wasn't true, it would protect him. So going out. So team building exercises is really important. So your team learns how to trust one another. Some of the team building exercises we did while I was in the military was like bridge building, where you had planks and blocks of wood and rope, and you had to build a bridge to get to the other side of a river and get your whole team over there safely, right? Without getting hurt. This team building exercise develops leadership skills, critical thinking skills, and communication, along with camaraderie. I don't expect you all to do any of those kinds of exercises, but you could probably start with something like paintball, right? Or laser tag, which is a fun team building exercise. I know in one agency, we did like a ropes course. So you had some people that were kind of scared of heights, but you had the rest of the team really supporting that person or going up with them on the ropes to get across the rope just to help them and show them that support. And just to see their face after they made it and hearing their team cheering them on, it just build that cohesiveness, that family cohesiveness that you have in your units. Train to maintain. This is the last principle of the Army, principles of unit training. So as the example I used previously, conducting training on how to write maybe a judicial review or a petition for removal, it builds confidence within your staff by continually training on the job topics, right? Maintaining your staff, allowing for self-care, scheduling time off, appreciation events for them. In the past, I know an agency took their unit to the movies one afternoon for self-care. I was actually shocked to hear at the summit last year in a workshop that a worker stated that they hadn't had vacation in over a year. And every time they put in for a vacation, it was denied. So I really didn't understand that. That definitely needs to be taken to another level. But just being able to show that you care about your workers and help maintain them in there to help retention, it's really important. It's not always just about the work, but it's about also your staff and how they're able to do the work and the support that they may need. So attending webinars and workshops and conferences related to your field is important also. In the military, you run every day, you're physically active, you do scheduled physical training tests to make sure that you're always maintaining your skills, even though you're not in combat every day, right? So you're just practicing. It's the same thing in child welfare. Staff should be ready at any time to go out on a case, right? They should be feeling confident and comfortable. I remember getting a call from my operations manager one evening to see if I wanted to go out with the SWAT team on a case because there were kids in the house. I had to be ready, attend the SWAT briefing, be able to get those kids out of that situation. So always being ready to act and feeling confident about it. So this is something that I read in one of the articles, in the same article regarding the Army principles. They stand by good leaders develop good training, and education and good training and education produces good leaders. So good leaders develop good training and education, and good training and education produces good leaders. Do you think that that's true? What do you think about that? I think that that's very true, right? If you have a good leader and they can develop training that's going to help their staff and education to keep them maintained, then that training, that good training and education that they get is going to produce good leaders. It's going to let them go on to be good leaders and lead other staff. I would like you to brainstorm on, some mentoring ideas that maybe you can incorporate in your units. Just remember, mentoring activities can be structured or unstructured, and it can be fun. That was great ideas that I heard from you all. Thank you very much for participating in that. Some takeaways that I also came up with, and some of it may be some of the things that you all discussed as well, is, dedicating some weekly time with staff. Have a senior worker take that staff around to get acclimated when they first start in the department, within the office, and as a point of reference, introduce them to people and kind of make them feel welcome. The supervisor also dedicating one-on-one time with the staff member and the unit. Provide opportunities for staff to attend trainings and conferences. Rotate staff so everyone has an opportunity to attend trainings and the Children's Summit. I know someone in child welfare that they never attended the summit, has never attended the summit at all, unfortunately. The webinars are so informative. The summit it's about your job, what you do, right? It pertains to your job. And it also helps with networking and being a part of your organization. So if you could rotate your staff where everyone gets an opportunity, I know everyone can't go at the same time, but rotating them so everyone has an opportunity to experience that would be really good. Have staff teach a related topic for professional development, skill building, and team building. This allows for them to research the topics, be able to teach it to their peers. That's how we learn, right? You teach one. It helps the trainer evaluate their own learning and understanding, and it increases collaboration among peers. It helps to build readiness skills and provides improved teamwork for effective outcomes. And then encouraging your staff to take scheduled time off for self-care. A lot of time people take time off. However, they're still working, right? They're still doing a case, or they're still working on something they want to catch up on. And so they don't really have self-care. So really encouraging them to take that time off. Everyone needs a mental break. They need time with their families and their friends just to not think about work for a minute and just really have that time to regroup. The importance of boundaries. The department conducted a survey to find out the characteristics of the importance of to the CPIs, right? The survey results indicated that the number one thing that was important to the CPIs, and I'm sure it's also for case management, was the ability to manage work and personal life. At the end of the survey, participants were able to provide comments, and the overall results of the survey and the comments reinforced that controlling caseload numbers is essential to maintaining a healthy balance between work and personal life. Now, I don't have the answers for controlling caseloads. That's something that within the agencies that they have to look at how they can do that. But that was the main concern for the participants of the survey, that they wanted caseloads to be controlled and that it was very essential for them to be able to maintain that work-life balance. When we talk about boundaries, we are talking about boundaries within the workplace, of course. And according to Gail Trimberger in 2012, she's from the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. She stated organizational influences may influence professional boundaries, and boundaries are shaped by a worker's personal development as well as their professional environment. She states that personal traits, job duties, and agency culture impacts professional boundaries and ethical behavior. Do you agree or disagree with that? I tend to agree with that, and we're going to talk a little bit about each of these points. So in personal traits, it involves the worker's life experiences. It could be both psychological and emotional. As a young child and young adult, mostly shapes how you interact with your clients, how you interact with people in general. So for example, growing up in my household with my Caribbean parents, all adults were addressed as Miss or Mr. or aunt or uncle. You were never allowed to call an adult just by their first name out of respect. So to this day, I still do that, especially when addressing my elders. I would also address my clients the same way when I would go out. It was always Miss Tracy or Mr. Jim or whoever. So think about some of the traits that you have carried into your adult life and how you use it in your day-to-day work. Because your personal traits do influence how you work with people on an everyday basis. With job duties, the day-to-day work, workers may live with their clients in a residential treatment home, right? Transport clients regularly and or meet clients in their personal homes. How might these different practice settings impact your professional boundaries? So for example, as a residential house parent, you become close to your clients because you live with them. You feed them. You ensure their daily needs are met. You ensure their homework is completed, just like a parent would, right? So those professional boundaries could easily be skewed and put you in a different personal relationship with those clients. When I worked as a client relations coordinator, we had serious violations that at times individuals had different opinions about because there was no consistency on standards like we talked about before. For example, we had a report where a worker had a romantic relationship with their client and leadership saw no problem with it because the worker stated the relationship started after the case was closed. But the questions I asked myself and posed to leadership was a client shown favoritism during this time? Was their case closed earlier so a relationship could ensue? Should the child have been removed but overlooked? It's a boundary issue. It's a dual relationship issue. It's an ethical dilemma. There was just so much wrong with that. But this was not the only case like this. We had plenty of cases that were violations. And that's why we talk about standards being consistent. According to Madison, Giratney, and Croxton, they found significant correlations between responses from private practice practitioners that state once a client, always a client, whereas a public sector worker viewed the client as a former client and approved of multiple or dual relationships with clients. In another study conducted by Schwartz and research friends, the findings suggested that the more personal disclosure a staff member permitted with a client, the better the outcome. And this was in a health-related dialysis setting, which I think is a little different. And the reason I say it's a little different is because in dialysis and health settings, you have to build up a different type of relationship. It's still a relationship where you're building rapport and that person trusts you. But I think for this study, it showed basically that you needed to have a little more personal disclosures with this person due to their medical situation. When we focus on agency culture, this includes the policies and the procedures and the general view of client-worker relationships. When I started with the department, the culture previously, due to high caseloads, was to do drive-by visits. That was the culture. For example, I was told workers would see their client at the bus stop and count it as a visit because the caseloads were overwhelming. This was about probably in 98, 99 timeframe. Workers brought their own children into the office because of unlimited work hours to get the job done. I remember bringing my own daughter into the office a couple of times and making a pallet under my desk until her father got off work to pick her up. Workers watched other workers, kids, so they could go on home visits. It was the norm. It was the culture of the office. So we have agency cultures that are instilled in the office, and so many boundary violations, with kids playing. My daughter used to play with kids that were getting ready to go to foster care, and things of that nature. So it was the norm. It was the norm. And it probably still happens to this day because the work can be overwhelming sometimes and you have to get it done. You have to also take care of your families the best way that you can. So the importance of having professional boundaries is to prevent burnout, right? To practice self-care and to respect and balance work life and personal life. Having boundaries preserves job satisfaction. It raises productivity to focus on task at hand. It lowers work stress. So, for example, just limiting the calls that you may take after hours or not take. I mean, when you're not on call, you should really have that respect of the time that you have with your family after hours. I can say I had to learn that over my different careers. I was answering emails, taking calls after hours, and found myself working into the night after working all day. So I want you to take a look. We're going to take a minute to read this vignette and answer to yourself if you think the worker attempted to set any boundaries. So this vignette states a worker worked the night shift from 2 p.m. to 11 p.m. They were on call that night. The supervisor allowed the worker to get off at 8 p.m. if they were on call, so they had time to rest in case they were called out. The worker got a call at 7:55 a.m. for a hospital case. The worker suggested the call go to the day shift that starts at 8 a.m. instead of them because a hospital call would take most of the day and the worker had to be back at work at 2 p.m. The worker pushed back from taking the call because it was not logical. The worker went to work that afternoon and started packing up their office because they felt they would be fired since they refused the on-call case. The operations manager called the worker in their office. The worker stated, "I know you called me here to fire me, and I am prepared to be dismissed." The operations manager informed the worker they were not getting fired and appreciated the logic presented because the worker had a good point. So basically, this worker did set boundaries in this vignette, right? A choice was made to preserve their well-being. A logical solution was also presented to the supervisor, and a teachable moment for the supervisor to think about revising a process for setting boundaries and practicing self-care of workers. This is a good example of reflective supervision, mutual conversation and respect, attentive listening, and solution-based interchange. Great. Here's a couple of takeaways from boundaries, looking at boundaries. Some ideas are taking lunch breaks and get away from your desk, setting focus time to write notes and make calls, not taking on more tasks than you can accomplish to avoid becoming overwhelmed because then that turns into burnout, setting priorities and limits, being open and honest about your boundaries and with your supervisor, and bringing positive ideas to leadership for productive outcomes. So the next section we're going to talk about is importance of safety. In January 2022, Deidre Silas, a 36-year-old DCF Illinois caseworker who joined the department in August of 2021, was visiting a home alone to check on children. She was fatally stabbed to death while conducting a welfare check. This was a domestic violence case. Just to tell you a little bit about that. What do you think could have been done differently? Just think about, It's a domestic violence case. She went out on her own to check on children and ended up having a fatality. I would say maybe what I would have done different for a domestic violence case is maybe call law enforcement to do a joint response because of the nature of the case. Would be something that I would probably have done differently in this situation. Now, mind you, she was a new worker. She had been there probably about a year, not even a year, actually, maybe 6 months. So she was still learning her job and becoming used to it. Another situation in 2011, while I worked in Robinson Service Center, we got a visit from a father whose child was removed from the caregiver. This father drove from Georgia to confront the local office. An altercation broke out in the regional director's office and someone called law enforcement. When law enforcement arrived, the father was found to have a tape recorder strapped to his person and a weapon and money for bond was found in his vehicle in the parking garage. What could have been done differently? Think about that. What would you have done differently? Well, first of all, due to the nature of the two state buildings, because it was in the state building downtown, you have child support in that building. Between the two buildings, you have probation, parole, investigations, etc. located in this building. They probably should have had some metal detectors installed at the entrance just because of the nature of the clientele that frequent those two buildings. No one expected this father to act in this manner. You know, the office actually had someone call down to the insurance department who was also located in that building because we knew that those guys carried weapons and they were able to come up to the regional director's office to assist until law enforcement arrived. So situations like these can have a worker feeling unsafe in their job. One common effect for child welfare professionals who have experienced or fear violence is emotional trauma. This can increase depression, anxiety, burnout, and compassion fatigue, leading to turnover, increased absenteeism, and reduced worker effectiveness. There's no way to ensure a caseworker will be safe. However, we can promote safety in policy and in practices and with practice. Just like they do fire drills in schools, doing some drills within your office. If something should happen, what is a code word maybe that could be said? In that instance at the Robinson Service Center, where my office was located, it was down, we were in a big giant suite. We're in a big suite, but my office was located down the hall from, where I couldn't even hear what was going on. Never knew that this guy was in the office and there was an altercation until after the fact. We did have a worker, a staff member that had a desk outside of my office, and this person actually saw what was going on and picked up their wallet and keys and left out of the office and locked themselves in our post office, our little postal room that we had because you had to use a code to get into there, but never alerted anyone else in their offices that something was going on to protect them. So just having something in place where people know exactly what to do if within their office, if there is something going on. So we're going to listen to this little video on situational awareness because situational awareness is something that we all have to practice, even in your day-to-day life, not just at work, but in your data walking around life every day.
Situational awareness is something that people talk a lot about when it comes to your self-defense. We mostly talk about situational awareness when we're thinking about avoiding a situation, right? We see a bad guy in an environment, we see something that doesn't look quite right, and we want to be able to avoid getting entangled with that person. The other way that situational awareness can tie it into your self-defense is to think about knowing where the exits are in a restaurant or something like that, knowing where your surroundings are. Maybe situational awareness gets a much bigger picture kind of view when you're traveling abroad with your family or maybe overseas or you're even a part of your state that you're not familiar with, knowing where travel areas are, knowing where mass transit is, knowing where the rally points or the meeting points you're going to go to if you were to get separated and your cell phone battery were to die. Those kinds of things all fall under the heading of situational awareness. Situational awareness is very important, but there's a practical aspect to situational awareness that often is overlooked when it comes to what I call the fantasy of situational awareness, or the delusion that a lot of people live under. Now, the traditional way that a lot of people, particularly in the firearms community, have looked at situational awareness for the individual in the moment is through a series of color codes that represent how ready or alert you are, how aware you are of your surroundings. And you might think of white as a condition where you're completely oblivious to your surroundings, where you're literally standing in a public space staring at your cell phone, completely unaware of what's going on around you. And you might think of red, or in some color code systems black, as actually being in a fight, being in a situation where, to the exclusion of everything else, you are hyper-focused on the person that you're trying to stop from hurting you or someone else. And of course, we have yellow and orange in the middle. And most people will tell you who study the color codes that they try to keep themselves in a condition yellow all the time. And what they mean by that is that they envision that they have this 360-degree awareness of generally who's in their environment, what's going on around them, and if someone's looking at them as a potential victim, where the exits are, where their family members are, and sort of what's going on in a 360-degree sphere all the time. Well, I find that to be completely impractical in terms of looking at the way we can be situationally aware, how alert we are, and how much focus we really have. So let's take a look at a more practical example of situational awareness. If we think about how we live our everyday lives outside of a training environment, outside of a choreographed range situation maybe, where we're focusing on a piece of paper, a piece of steel, or even a scenario environment where we aren't thinking about, what we have to pick up at the grocery store, what our kids are doing, a cell phone call we're waiting for, maybe looking at our social media or something like that while we're in a public space. Now, we don't have to be in a situation where we are hyper-focused on that cell phone in our hand to the exclusion of everything else at every moment of the day. But certainly, I think you can probably recognize that there are points during the day where you are looking at a map, looking at a book, maybe sitting in a restaurant looking at a menu. And while my head may be on a swivel just prior to looking down, after I look around my environment, I see that there's a couple cameramen, I've got a director over here near the monitors, I know that there's a door right there that's cracked. If something were to happen, that's where I'm going to go. It's the only exit from this room. The minute that I look back at this whiteboard, or the minute that I were to look down at my cell phone or look away from that restaurant down to the menu, I don't know what's changing. I don't know if the person off to my right pulled a knife out of a bag. I don't know if someone pulled a gun out. I don't know if someone stood up and positioned themselves awkwardly close to me because I am focused on that menu. And that's how practical situational awareness actually works in the real world. You can't have a 360-degree view when you're looking at that menu in your hands. So what we really want to do is split our attention. We want to be very aware of the fact that, sure, when we first walk into a new space, we should look around. Where are the exits? Is there anything awkward going on in here? Is everyone behaving normally? Is there anyone suspicious to me? Is there anyone in my environment that I'm not quite sure about? And what's going to happen is, as we focus at that one person who is potentially dangerous to us, we're going to have a narrower and narrower situational awareness. If we're engaged in a conversation with someone, we're going to be focused on their eyes. We're maybe going to be watching their mouth move. Maybe they're gesturing with their hands. Maybe they're showing us something. Right now, I hope that I have the majority of your attention focused on whatever screen you're watching this video on. And that's the narrow area that you are really paying attention to. Whatever's happening back here, well, there's your condition white. And this is how we can actually apply the color codes. You may be in a condition red, directly focused on this screen, very aware of what I'm saying, very aware of what I'm drawing, but you're kind of oblivious to what's going on behind you. Now, chances are, if you're definitely a self-defense person, you're watching this video, you may already have turned around to see, in case I sent somebody to your house or to your car or your workplace or wherever you're sitting right now in the coffee shop to sneak up behind you and play a gotcha game, right? So you take a look. Nope, nothing going on. Now focus back on me, take a look at the screen, and once again, you have narrowed your situational awareness. And this is when the ambush can happen. And the biggest problem with the myth of situational awareness is that it ignores the possibility of the ambush. If people convince themselves, if you've convinced yourself that you're in condition yellow or orange or some higher alert status, always ready, always knowing what's going on around you, then the way you train and the way you think about your learned responses may be dramatically different from what you should be doing, which is accepting that you can be caught off guard. No matter how alert you are, how ready you want to be, there's a huge difference between specific anticipation, specific attention that you're paying to this person who's a potential threat, and general readiness. Being in condition yellow really should mean that you're generally ready, right? We go about our day with our defensive tools, with our training, with our plan, with our idea of what we might see as something that's potentially threatening, with our ideas that we're going to look for exits, that we're going to be aware of where telephones are, maybe where the ambulance station is, the closest hospital when we're visiting a new area. All of those things make us generally ready so that when the ambush happens, we can quickly decide what we need to do. Maybe our trained responses are going to be at that level where we can unconsciously execute them. We have the power of recognition, and our learned responses just come out. When someone hits us from behind, we know what to do. But the idea that we're going to see them coming or hear them walking or catch their reflection in a mirror in front of us really is foolish, and it can set you up for failure. When you think about situational awareness, I want you to think about it in a very practical way that can be applied in the real world. While you're having conversations, while you're focusing on things of interest, while you're looking at your phone, reading a map, or just sitting down to have dinner and focusing on that menu, trying to decide which of the delicious entrees you want to put into your mouth. Remember, situational awareness doesn't make it so that you can't be ambushed. It simply means that you're lowering the odds of the bad guy sneaking up on you. When you train, remember, you are going to avoid the situations when situational awareness helps you. When you think about your learned responses, they really should be trained for response to the ambush.
Research indicates that home visits help to reduce child maltreatments and improve child development outcomes. However, child welfare workers are more susceptible to increased violence, including verbal threats and physical attacks. Another study in 2009 found that in rural areas, child welfare workers are at higher risk of violence, which could be a result of isolated areas and slower emergency response time. So just being aware of where you are at all times, the situation, the neighborhoods you're going into is very important. So some of the things to keep our workers safe, how can we keep them safe? We can prioritize the safety of child welfare professionals by conducting safety trainings in pre-service and practice when shadowing in the field. So our workers, like I was saying, having something in the office where kind of like a fire drill or some type of drill, there's someone that's come in the office that is violent and what should everyone do and where should everyone go? When going into a home, staying near the door, right? You want to be near exits. So when conducting a home visit or seeing clients in the office, you can get away from that person safely. So I had an example had a situation actually when I worked in client relations. So we would get all kinds of clients that would come up, they could just walk in. And we had this man that came into the office, and clearly there was some mental health issues. He was in my coworker's office and I could hear it escalating. And so I got up and walked by the office so I could get a description of the person. And so she could see that I noticed what was going on and that I was going to handle the situation or call someone for her while she tried to de-escalate this guy in her office. So I went back to my office. I called law enforcement and told them that we needed someone from the CIT unit, which is the crisis intervention team, to come out. Because clearly this guy had some mental health issues. And so they did come out and they were able to handle the situation and get the guy out of the office. Now, the bad thing was my coworker was by the window and the client was by the door. So she had no way out of that office. He could have actually jumped up and attacked her and she would have nowhere to go. So just being, mindful on how your office may be set up so you have easy access out of your office in case you do have a client, if you see clients in your office where you can get out safely. When knocking on the front door of someone's home, when you're doing a home visit, knock it and then steps to the side. So for instance, knock on the door, back up and step to the side. So if someone's going to shoot through the door or open the door to grab you, you're not directly in harm's way. They have to have some steps to get to you and you have a chance to get away if you need to. When walking to your car, split your keys in your fingers to use as a weapon. I remember I was out on a domestic violence case and it was a case that I got in the evening. And so the late evening. And so I was leaving the home. This perpetrator already showed a lot of manipulation while I was in that home. And so when I was leaving, he said, I'll walk you to your car. And I said, okay. So I did split my keys because, of course, we don't have any weapons on us. And I split my keys just so I could protect myself if I needed to scratch his eyes out or whatever I needed to do to get away safely. Of course, with that dynamic, they're very manipulative and very charming. So when I got to the car, he put his hand out to shake my hand and said, thank you very much for coming this evening. After he went off on me in the home about speaking to his wife separately. So, which was good. It ended up well. I was able to get home. Do not walk and look down on your phone. Someone could be following you and you're not even aware of it, right? So you want that situational awareness, being aware of what's going on around you. And call law enforcement for a joint response if you're going into a dangerous neighborhood or situation. I can tell you one day I went out on a case one evening, another case, and I read the history. I'm like, oh, this will be fine. It can go out. But I still call law enforcement to meet me out there, do a joint response with me. I called them right when I turned on the street and they said, where are you right now? I gave them the address. They said, where are you right now? I said, oh, I just turned on the street. And they said, go back to the corner and wait for us at the corner store. So I went back to the convenience store and waited. And within seconds, usually I have to wait a while for them to finally come. But within seconds, 3 cop cars pulled up. They jumped out of their cars. They got their shotguns out of their trunk and put on their gloves. And I just didn't know what was happening. So, of course, we don't have weapons or anything like that. So I went to my trunk and I put on my gloves because they put on their gloves. And then they informed me that I was getting ready to go into a drug house and that I needed to be very careful. So that was a very eventful evening, needless to say. So here are a couple of brief videos to test how observant you are.
Here's your challenge. How many people in orange shirts get subs? Go. Seven people in orange shirts got subs. But what else did you see? Did you notice the ice cream truck change to a pizza truck? Did you notice the glasses? What about the man leaving the suspicious package next to the truck? Your next challenge? Be aware of your surroundings. If you see something suspicious, say something to local authorities. Here's your challenge. How many times is the yellow backpack passed? Go. So the yellow backpack was passed 17 times. But how aware were you? Did you notice that our scene moved outside? What about the student who put on a hat and switched books? Or the woman dropping the suspicious package? Sometimes it's easy to miss the obvious. Your next challenge? Be aware of your surroundings. If you see something suspicious, say something to local authorities.
This was just an exercise to show you that so many things can be happening around you that you are unaware of. Just recently, I went to Home Depot, me and one of my friends. We were going to redo the garden at my house. And so we went to Home Depot to get some supplies. And as I was walking out of Home Depot, I noticed this guy that looked a little sketchy standing outside. And then I noticed him out of the corner of my eye following us to the car. And when I turned around and opened the trunk, he said, "Can I help you?" And I said, "No." Looking him directly in his eye, I said, "No, we don't need any help. Thank you." But he kept still lurking around. So I started looking around to see if maybe there was anyone else maybe working with this guy or anyone else that was going to approach us. Well, a worker came up to us, and I think maybe he observed the guy as well. And he said, "Can I help you?" And when he came over, then that guy walked away. I don't know if he was waiting for us to maybe put our handbags down in the trunk or what he was about to do. So the worker came over and he was able to help us load the vehicle. But just being aware, now my friend that was with me never knew this guy was following us, never knew anything, never thought anything of it. And that's where being observant of your surroundings is really important. No matter where you go, you can never let down, not to be paranoid, but to always be observant of your surroundings, because sometimes people are watching you and you don't even know, or following you home and you don't even know. And that's happened to me before at a gas station where a car followed me to my house. So it's just really being aware and observant of your surroundings at all times. So some of the takeaways that, for safety is maybe taking a self-defense class or bringing it into the office. So people, law enforcement is always happy to do things like that, come in and kind of help people with a self-defense class. I know they do it here at the university. Be aware of your surroundings. Always look around where you are and be aware of your surroundings. Review cases before going out on home visits. Contact law enforcement to conduct joint visits with you. Conduct a home visit with a colleague. Mandated safety awareness course for staff. Incorporating in pre-service training. Always let your supervisor or your coworker know where you are going. Everyone, should be aware that you're going to this house. So if something happens, at least you know where that worker was, the last place that they were. So child welfare professionals, as we know, they have complex jobs and they work with diverse populations. So implementing mentorship, respecting boundaries, and promoting safety are key ingredients in assisting with sustaining and retaining the workforce. It shows you care and that you're invested in their well-being while they do this hard job. Some things that we can, from these takeaways is building your own safety plan for your staff, right? Setting up boundaries and letting them be open enough to talk to you about some of the boundaries they may have. And also coming up with a plan for mentoring, doing that one-on-one training with your staff members and peer mentoring and having people teach on a topic. Let them feel like they are a part of that agency And so that they are really in a part of it by doing the thing, some topics, teaching on topics that they feel comfortable with, as well as going to conferences and trainings and feeling a part of the organization by networking with others and talking with others in their field. So to answer the question I reflected on earlier in the presentation about what stood out with some supervisors for me, I can honestly say the supportive leadership style, always being present and personally leading, the creative ways that they kept staff engaged, and the continual training that they focusing on fundamentals of the job to make me feel confident in my work, and that they were very supportive in the trainings, wanting you when they saw things that were out there. Hey, you guys should do this. This is really important training for you, and allowing you to go to those trainings. So those are some of the things that I reflected on that I felt helped me while I worked in the field. And I hope you can come up with some things for your staff or for yourself, that some takeaways that you can do as well.